Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Other Record Labels. This is Scott again. You know, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so on Apple Podcasts or however you're listening to this. The majority, I think, is Apple Podcasts. But subscribing is great. Leave a review if you don't mind. But more importantly, share it with some friends. I think I've been getting some great feedback, and thank you for that. And a lot of the feedback I've been getting is from people in the industry and a lot of DIY musicians and some indie labels. And so if you work in the industry or are connected in some way, please share it with some friends. Let people know, because it's such a small niche. The topic of record labels and indie record labels, it's going to be hard to find the audience, but they're out there. So please consider sharing with your friends. Great guest today. I'm really excited about the Hardly Art is the. I'm trying to be suspenseful here, but Hardly Art is the episode today. A great record label based in Seattle. They're a subsidiary of SubPop, and one of the labels right off the top that I was really excited to talk to. I'm such a huge fan of Hardly Art, and today we've got Jason Baxter of Hardly Art. How's it going, man?
I'm good, thanks.
Thanks so much for doing this. This is great. I know a lot of people are big fans of your label.
That's great to hear. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
And so you're in Seattle, that's right?
Yep.
Your email signature says publicist, social media, and some A&R. What's your role?
Yes.
What's your role with the label?
So I'm the in-house publicist, so I do the majority of the PR for the roster.
Okay.
And I handle all the social media.
Cool.
And then some A&R just means that for a handful of our artists, I do what I guess most other labels would refer to as project management.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just like the person in charge, the point person for those particular projects, and that would be Dude York, Taco Cat, Chastity Belt, and Ian Sweet.
Oh, cool. So it's not like they give you one band a year to sign. It's not like you're allowed one coupon.
No.
That's cool. Can you give me a bit of a history of the label?
Yeah, absolutely. So just this past year, we were celebrating our 10th anniversary.
Oh, wow. Congrats.
So, yeah, thank you. So in 2007, if you'll recall at the time, SubPop was flourishing in a pretty big way,
right?
With bands like The Shins and Iron and Wine.
Right, yeah.
And so Jonathan Poneman, who is one of the co-founders of SubPop, wanted to find a way to rack focus back towards smaller, more developing artists, the kind of bands that SubPop was signing back in the day, in the early years. And they tried having imprints before and not met with much success. So the idea with Hardly Art was to try that again, treat it as an experiment. It might not necessarily pan out, but the hope is that it will. And I think in particular, early on, the idea was that majority of the signings would be local, to sort of embrace Seattle and the music scene here and try and elevate bands that were great, but maybe just didn't have as high of a profile.
Sure.
So they hired on Sarah Moody as the general manager. She's been with the label all 10 years. And under her stewardship, obviously we're still around. So
that's
things
great.
have gone all right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you guys share A&R? Like, do you say like this band would be more appropriate for this imprint, or how does that work?
No, it's actually sort of a policy here to keep that very separate.
Okay, cool.
And one thing in particular is that we don't ever want to be interpreted as like a stepping stone or like SubPop Junior.
Right.
It's we share a lot of resources, but
sure.
One area where we're very separated is when it comes to A&R.
Okay, cool. I was just real quick. I was just looking through your FAQs, and I was like reading through your demo policy. It's quite funny. Do you guys get a lot of demos coming through email and?
We do, yeah. Not just email, but physical to our PO box. And,
that's cool.
It's a lot to sort through, but
yeah. And people people still send physical, like a CD or a vinyl, or what comes through?
It's mostly CDs,
Oh, okay.
but we have a big box of cassettes and LPs that we haven't listened to because
Oh, wow.
because it's a little more time consuming.
Yeah, sure. I would think that if you had a vinyl, like I'd feel like that would get you a little bit ahead of everyone else, ahead of the MP3s and the email. I don't know.
I guess
maybe I'm just wishful thinking.
Not in our case, but
yeah, okay, that's a good lesson.
If and when we do get around to putting those on, it will have to,
Have you ever?
It requires more active listening.
Have you ever signed a band? I think I want to kind of ask this to everyone because I asked this to Billy from Yep Rock. But have you ever signed a band from someone who's come through like an email or a manila envelope in the mail?
Unfortunately, no. It doesn't mean that we're not listening to everything that gets sent.
Sure.
But as of yet, no one has been signed based off of cold email or a demo submission.
Well, and it just goes to show you too how much of it is hard work and kind of building your own foundation as a band or as an artist and through relationships and just being consistent as opposed to and I think you referenced this in your FAQs is just like as opposed to sending a mass email. And just hoping a record deal comes out of the MP3 hitting the right inbox.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
Just sort of like you're spraying it everywhere. And the more personal you can make it, the better. Because you can always tell, if it's a mass email or if you've just, swapped out certain proper nouns or whatever.
You know what? I'm totally guilty of that. So I'm not going to say anything bad about those people. I've been there. How would you describe the vibe of Hardly Art's roster? Is there some sort of like consistent sound or common thread through the artists?
I think, people will say that to me and I see where they're coming from, that there is some level of consistency. It's never a thing that we're actively considering when we're thinking about signing a band. Will it jibe with everyone else?
Sure, yeah.
It's more just about the strength of the music and if you believe in the artist. That having been said, occasionally there'll be times where we play something and just I just don't know if this is quote unquote Hardly Art.
Right. Yeah.
Which I guess is just more of an intuitive thing than something I could articulate.
It's also nicer than just saying no, thank you.
Right. Well, I would never say that to anyone.
I'm joking.
You're not a fit.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think a label should lock themselves into a certain sound or aesthetic?
I think everyone should keep an open mind, and I enjoy it when a label will take a risk or surprise me with something that they're putting out that I didn't expect to come from them. That said, I am a big fan of labels that have sort of a house aesthetic or a house vibe where what you're going to get. And I was listening to some your label stuff, and it seems to have that sort of consistency.
Right. Oh, cool.
Which I think is a really admirable trait.
Yeah, I always struggle with that. I'm the same. I look at some labels, and especially even when a couple labels I've been looking at where their artwork, everyone's artwork is it's almost like it's the same designer, but in a great way, and
sure.
A lot of that, I kind of envy that in a way, but it's hard to do, and I don't know if it's the right thing. It's confusing.
Yeah, on one end of the spectrum, you've got Sacred Bones or Arts and Crafts, where it's you're locked into it looking a certain way.
Right.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's you can go crazy and be as diverse as you want. And we tend to be hands off about that side of things, and just let the bands do whatever they want artwork wise.
Right.
Within reason when it comes to deluxe packaging or whatever.
Sure.
But,
yeah.
As far as the visuals are concerned, we give them complete freedom.
That's good. And I think at the end of the day, the fans of the label ultimately are the fans of you and your tastes and Sarah's tastes and the people. So it is really, if you like it, then hopefully the fans of the label will like it.
You hope so. Yeah. Yeah. At the end of the day, that's how you'd like it to shake out.
Right.
And, I certainly hope that's the case. They seem to be.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say, since I'm on the social media all day, like I get a pretty good sense of the pulse of things, and there seem to be people who are fans of particular bands on the label, and then people who, like you were saying, are just fans of the label and will check out whatever we are putting their way.
And I think that's why it's so great. And I've seen your social media. It's so great for labels to actually have a personality, you know, someone that they can relate to, you know.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. Hopefully, you know, not ever going too far, but you know, that's.
You know, when we're talking about the genres, and you know, some of the how Hardly Art came to exist underneath SubPop. I was talking last night with a producer from Toronto about how hard it is for non-mainstream music and electronic, ambient, indie rock to get grant funding or radio play. Do you have like a strategy for promoting, you know, weird music or non-mainstream art?
Well, we kind of try. There's certain things that we're always going to do when it comes to marketing that are just sort of the essentials. But taking a more macro look at it, we do try and approach each project differently, and you know, try and find a way to shine a spotlight on what we think makes the artist special or this particular record special.
That's good.
But, you know, it is a struggle. And down here in the States, we don't even have the grant money component.
Sorry about that. I didn't mean to rub that in.
No, we're not jealous at all. But yeah, no, it's difficult. And part of what one way I think that you can get it in front of folks is just to seek out the writers and the tastemakers who are passionate about that particular type of music.
That's a good point.
And get to them, because they'll spread the word to the people who trust their tastes, and then you're reaching the people that are going to be excited about that kind of sound. You know?
And that's a great point. And I mean, you know, when you talk about mainstream, it's like you really don't need to get into the mainstream in order to exist, really. I mean, there are the blogs that love your label and the people that love those blogs. I mean, there's a real healthy community there.
Yeah. I mean, the internet sort of changed everything in that regard.
Totally.
And just the landscape of music consumption now is so different with the rise of streaming and things like Bandcamp that, like you're saying, you don't need to be in the top 40 to have a sizable audience anymore.
Yeah, that's great. I read it in an article that described you guys as a record label that has thrived in the era of the death of the record label. What kind of things does it take for a label to stay alive these days?
The word I would use is adaptability, or maybe flexibility, because things are so rapidly evolving from year to year.
It's so true.
That you really have to be able to stay on your toes. You know, it seems like it wasn't even that long ago that people were saying that MP3s are gonna, you know, kill physical media, and then, you know, vinyl had a resurgence and cassettes had a resurgence, and then streaming came along, and
it's so true.
Yeah, things are constantly shifting, and you have to be able to adjust your business model and your work ethic to fit with the changing times.
I remember, you know, the thing, it's almost pisses me off about how, like, if an artist has a record every 2 or 3 years, I remember back in the early 2000s how, like, the address you would, like, the URL you'd put on the back of their thing, like their social media would change every year. You know, it was like Pure Volume, and then it was like MySpace, and then it was like, should we do Twitter, or is that going to stick around, or you know what I mean? It's like every year it was something different.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
it's so hard to keep up.
It really is.
I want to ask you about, you know, the concept of the record label in general, and forgive me if I'm flying all over the place here, but pop culture has kind of made record labels out to be the bad guy. What does a label have to do to be seen as like an advocate or a partner with artists?
That's a great question. You know, I would hope, for the most part, that and you see this with younger artists and stuff, that they're sort of aware that paradigm is outdated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Yeah,
and that it, you know, it's most often satire if you're looking at something like Josie and the Pussycats or whatever. And I think if you're a smaller label with, you're not having, there's not some huge conference table and gold records on the wall and cocaine breakfast or whatever, then people trust that you're coming from a genuine place, which we like to think that we are. And really, I think it's just a matter of making a strong case for, how much you are invested in their art and sharing their art with people, which is fundamentally our mission. We just want to be able to put music we believe in into people's ears, give them an audience, the kind of audience we think they deserve. You were referring to the death of the record label recently. It's, I would hope it's somewhat common knowledge that it's a struggle for us too. We're not sitting in, bathtubs full of money, laughing while the poor artist, suffers on tour. So, the reality is that it's hard on both sides of it. But we're, working day and night to make sure that people are as successful as we think they ought to be.
How do you, is there an effort to stay transparent with the artist to kind of keep them apprised on everything? And if, if their royalties are small, if there's kind of an explanation as to why, because for me running a label, I understand these things, but I'm surprised at how little an artist knows where the money goes or what happens to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we try and operate with as full transparency as possible, especially when it comes to money, but also even marketing and publicity campaigns, so that they know who's been sent the record and who turned it down and all that sort of stuff, because I have been a musician myself and released music, and I know how demoralizing it can sometimes be if things don't seem like they're going a certain way. So it's, I understand that it's very helpful and sometimes relieving to have at the very least an explanation for why things are bad or why things are great,
Right.
That's always the preferable thing, to be able to say oh, well, you got all this money because such and such thing happened with Spotify or whatever. So, it's important to us that the band knows everything that's going on every step of the way.
That's cool. There's kind of shifting back to when we were talking about demos and discovering bands. There's so much music out there every day. And this is a question, not just for signing bands, but also a question for artists who are working on a record and trying to figure out how to stand out in this world. But with so much music out there, what makes an artist or a track exciting or catches your attention?
If I had previously been unaware of them or not been told through word of mouth or caught them live or whatever, I think it's just, are you doing something unique that I'm not hearing elsewhere?
Right.
That's really important. Do you seem enthusiastic or poised for something greater? Do you want something greater? Are your lyrics striking a nerve? Things like that. When it comes to music with vocals, you always want to try and find somebody with a voice you haven't heard before, whether that's a point of view or literally how it sounds, because you don't want to fit in. You want to be accessible to people, but it helps to be your own thing. That's the kind of music we are seeking out, is something that feels individual or coming from a strong perspective.
It's got to be such a difficult hybrid to find something that is accessible and enjoyable and listenable, but that we've never heard before. You know what I mean?
Right. Oh yeah. No, it's a very delicate balance, which, is why we have we've got a fairly healthy sized roster, but we're very, very, very picky when it comes to our signings. And we only release a certain number of records a year because we want to give them all, the amount of attention they deserve. So it can be a bit of a small club at times.
Are there records that the bands that fit all your criteria, but just for some reason, the album sounds great, but they're just not, you just don't think they're different enough? You don't think they're like creating new ground enough?
I couldn't think of an example off the top of my head. No.
Yeah, I just, it's curious because I try to figure out as a listener, and I follow all the blogs and I love all the premieres. There's like 3 or 4 premieres a day or more, and I try to figure out what is it that makes me like just like drop everything that I'm doing, and it happens like maybe once a week, but more likely once a month, where it's like, wow, this is amazing, this is beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's so tough.
Yeah, but it's the best feeling when that happens.
Oh, for sure. And that's that's right. It's kind of like gambling. It's why we do it, for that feeling, I think.
Totally.
I really want to ask you some questions that thinking about an audience that may be not just DIY labels, but also possibly DIY musicians. A friend of mine, a publicist, told me once the biggest problem he sees with DIY musicians is that they don't give themselves enough time to properly put out a record. What kind of things should a label or an indie artist be doing in that window between when a record is mastered and when it's released?
Oh, boy. Well, if you're having to do all the marketing yourself, I would advise a DIY or an unsigned artist to plan a tour around when you want this record out. If you're going to self-release, so use your connections and network and book what you can, even if it's a small thing. And just send it out to, writers and editors that you admire, because you'd be surprised how receptive people are to getting the music straight from an artist as opposed to someone like me, a publicist.
Right, yeah.
Because that way there's an element of discovery to it, or curation on the part of the writer if they like what they hear.
That's a good point.
They're fielding emails all day from, labels and publicists, but, to hear directly from a band, it's still a crapshoot, but it may, that may help your cause. So do what you can to get yourself written up, find the alt weeklies in your area and reach out to them. They're more likely to, publicize a local artist.
Right.
And give yourself time to get elements in place. If that's what you desire, if you're trying to level up, in terms of profile, because, it's so easy now just to go straight to Bandcamp or something as soon as you're done, and then call it a day.
Right.
Which is, you're welcome to do that as well. Just throw it up and then promote it on, Facebook or whatever. I do try and impart what I can about marketing to people that are just coming up, because I have been in that position and not known a whole lot about the industry or how it works.
Right. What does it look like for you guys in that time? How much of a lead time do you guys give yourself from the release date working backwards, and what goes on during that time?
That's about 4 to 5 months.
Okay.
Partly because of how long production takes.
Right.
There's a limited number of vinyl manufacturers in the world, pressing plants, that is. So there's always a line.
Yeah.
So you have to account for that.
And you try to have the vinyl ready for release date?
Oh, always. Okay. Yeah. And another reason for the long lead time is long lead press. Magazines and some websites have different deadlines than a blog would.
Okay.
Because they have to, get the issues printed and distributed and everything. So those folks will get a record quite early, so that, in hopes of getting some coverage in a print magazine. But during the rest of that time, it's just sort of, it's laying groundwork, We'll be servicing it to various people, journalists and editorial at digital service providers like iTunes or Spotify.
Right.
trying to build anticipation and get people interested. And then, of course, the whole album cycle is usually around 3 months of putting singles out there and trying to drum up press and playlisting and things like
Right.
that.
There was like a little fad, and I feel like it's kind of gone now, of like dropping an album, just surprise dropping and just immediately doing that. Is that something you guys have ever done, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I think that kind of only works if you're Beyonce.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, no, that's
Right?
true. That's true.
No matter what, people are going to write about you.
Right.
Whereas if you're sort of an unheard or up-and-coming indie band, you need time to build a profile and get people acquainted with you.
Oh, that's a good point. And when you think back, like the people who've done it, or even just with a week lead time, they're pretty big.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. So you run social media, and this is one of the questions I get a lot from a lot of my musician friends and even people on my label is a lot of artists I know. They'll launch an album with a bunch of social media accounts when that record's coming out, and then within a few months those accounts are dormant, and they're, you know what I mean?
Right.
What should an artist or a small label strategy be, their social strategy, if they don't have a social media coordinator or they don't even know where to begin with respect to social media? Yeah.
In my opinion, you should be maintaining a constant presence.
Right.
Otherwise,
that's fair.
Otherwise, it can be fairly transparent that you're just using these channels as a means for promoting a certain project. So I would just think of them as an extension of your own personality, because no one's following a particular band on Instagram to hear about when the new single's dropping. They're there to get sort of a window into their life or their personality or what they're into. So even if you're a label, if you can try and find a way to make it so that you're not just posting about, go listen to the new song or pre-order the record, people respond to that more because it's genuine. And, if you're inactive for a while, then you're certainly not going to be growing your audience. So I think it's a crucial thing to remember, at least in this day and age, for this time being, while these things are still important parts.
Do you think it's better? Would you suggest to an artist or a label who's not able to maintain that to not do it at all? As opposed to
no. I mean, anything's better than nothing.
Sure.
And it is very time consuming. I certainly sympathize with that.
Yeah.
And some days you just don't know what to post about, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's absolutely worth doing, even if you're not able to commit to it on a regular basis.
Well, and you're totally right about the idea of like giving it a personality and having it be an extension of who you are. And I've seen that, and it's so great. It's great whenever it's a company, but you know that person's name and you know that person's tastes and opinions. I think it's cool.
Yeah, even if you don't necessarily know exactly who is behind the account, but you get that they have thoughts in their head that aren't just advertising. You know
where they stand politically and
sure. Yeah. I think, is it Arby's has one of my favorite Twitters,
or Wendy's maybe, or it could be Arby's, but I think was it Wendy's? Yeah, I know what you mean. There's a few of them.
Yeah, some very salty corporate accounts.
Yeah,
or ones that are just fun, and it's like, well, okay, this is it. That's how you do that right.
Oh, that's so great. Yeah, actually, I think there was a Reddit AMA about that, and I think it was you could be right that it's Arby's or Wendy's, but like there's like a staff of like 4 or 5 like writers and comedy writers.
Oh wow,
running it. Yeah, it's
I'll have to look that up.
A pretty big crew, but. I love it when people do that. And it's interesting too, because I've seen it at a lot of companies, like not music companies, just general companies, that everyone just kind of assumed a few years ago that social media was just, oh, you know what, we'll just do it whenever we are doing something interesting. But now that there's full-time staff, multiple staff at just, a macaroni company, like
right.
It's a real thing now.
It's strange times, yeah.
I want to talk about streaming. I want to switch over. for smaller labels, it's so daunting to be competing for playlist placement with everyone. Where's your head at right now with respect to Spotify? Are you optimistic? Are you cynical? How's your opinion of streaming services evolved over the past few years?
I would say I'm optimistic, but I'm not unaware of how challenging it is. And clearly, things are very sort of top heavy in terms of favoring mainstream
Right.
Pop and R&B and hip hop, country genres like that. But really, something I was sort of mulling over somewhat recently is it doesn't feel all that different from the heyday of FM radio.
Right.
Because essentially, if playlisting is in part driven by how many people are listening, then is that all that different from, DJs playing a song because it keeps getting requested?
Right.
So, and I don't think that it's totally closed off from smaller bands. We've had great success with some of our acts on Spotify. But at the same time, we're privileged to have, people whose job it is to interface with editorial at Spotify and suggest things to them. So, it's a struggle. I think it's not, the worst thing. I think a lot of people like to demonize the streaming services.
Right.
But it's such a tool for music discovery that hasn't really come along in a long time. And I think that is ultimately a good thing. It is helping bands find audiences all over the world in ways that they weren't able to before. And, in a couple years' time, maybe the bubble will burst and we'll be talking about something else.
It's so true. Everything always feels like it's the end. It's always like, this is where it's going to stop.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. No, it's right now, it's one of these things where for me, it's such a hot topic because, if you're featured on a real playlist, and we've been featured a couple times, and it's like, okay, the artist can make rent that month. Like, it's a big deal. And then when it doesn't happen on the next single or the next record, it's so tough. It's so sad.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel you.
Is it as on from your level, from at your label's level? Is it a little less mysterious? Is there things you guys have figured out a little more?
We're just trial and error, same as everyone else. I think the most that we can do is be very selective about which songs we're going to choose as singles before the record comes out.
Oh, I see. Okay. So it is a lot like radio.
Yeah. So, if you can try and read the tea leaves on what type of songs seem to be resonating with the listening audience on Spotify, then you can try and cater your marketing campaign to focus on the songs that you think have the best chance of things like playlisting.
Right.
But apart from that, so much of it is out of our control. It's either their editorial or, it's numbers, pure algorithm.
I hope it doesn't go too far down the path of radio, because what I do like about Spotify, and I don't know what's going on in head office, but I really do feel like they are thinking about the independent artist. And I like to see a playlist that has Bon Iver, and then it has like a band you've never heard of, or an artist you've never heard of who maybe only has 200 followers. And so the artist apps that they have, I like what they're doing, and I felt appreciated and acknowledged by them in the past 2 years. So I hope it keeps up.
Same. And it seems like that is an ongoing concern for them, which is great, to be able to have that large of a market share and be willing and interested in maintaining, helping sustain indie musicians and labels, I think is admirable.
Yeah, I want to jump to the complete opposite end of the world here and talk about physical media for a little bit. The way I see things right now is that there's CDs that are still sort of hanging on, and they're cheap to produce and they're cheap to ship, and then over on the other end you have tapes, which are really cool and they're cheap to produce and to ship, but yet there's a little bit of confusion and not everyone's completely on board yet. And then vinyl, of course, is so cool and it's totally a thing, but it's for us, it's so daunting, so expensive, and even shipping from Canada everywhere, it's at $20 to $30 just to ship from where we are. Can you share Hardly Art's perspective on the formats, and then maybe share with me your thoughts on the formats if you were an indie artist doing it yourself?
Okay. For us, every release that's a proper full length is going to get every physical medium.
Okay, cool. Even CDs.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, yeah.
That's cool.
We manufacture quite a few CDs, and you'd be surprised that how many CDs actually sell, because stores will still indie retail stores will still bring them in, and it's helpful for things like radio servicing if you're going to service physical,
right.
And people still have CD players in their cars and stuff,
and I've heard that bands still do well at shows too with CDs.
Yeah, well, it's the cheaper option.
Yeah.
It'll probably fit in your bag or your backpack or your pocket easier.
Yeah.
Same for tapes. Since we're kind of late adapters to the cassette revival,
right?
But I think that they're very, they have their own special allure as a physical object, and some people prefer the quality. Oddly enough,
yeah.
And again, they're pocket sized, and they're a great merch item for bands on tour. And then for the second part of your question, I'm a vinyl collector. I think that's probably my preferred mode of listening, even though the majority of the time I'm not sitting next to a stereo.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. That's more like at home stuff. But I'm a big fan of tapes. I got a bunch of those at home too. If I were, in the position of being a DIY or up and coming band, and I have been, and we mostly did digital releases. It's prohibitively expensive to press a limited run of LPs.
For sure.
And you don't want to be sitting on a giant stack of unsold vinyl. Believe me.
Yeah.
But tapes are a great cheap option. Just get in touch with somebody at National Audio Company and get a couple hundred made, and you'd be surprised. It's like $1 a tape.
Yeah.
And then you can sell those at shows for $5. And I think it's a cooler, funkier medium when you're a DIY or punk or underground band anyway. And you can sell those through your Bandcamp, which is another thing that's driving music discovery these days, and a place where I find a lot of cool, more obscure bands.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, the format thing. That's the thing I really try to figure out, and I've actually become more confident with just doing a digital only release. I always felt like we were kind of copping out, but I'm more confident with it now. I think it's okay.
I do too. And the thing that's worth keeping in mind is that you're not spending all this money up front of production. So, you're already coming from a place where you're probably not in the hole that deep. You've paid to get something mastered and mixed and recorded. But then after that, once the money starts coming in from digital, it's working against that, and you'll be profiting sooner. Yeah,
no, that's a great point. And that's actually really, I never really thought about that, because, you think back to the early 2000s, even before, like when CDs were like Glassmaster only, and a Digipack was, you were going to be almost $1,000 into printing CD run. After, like you said, recording and mastering. So yeah, it is kind of nice that it's like, once you get the waves back, then you can start making money.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really cool. I don't want to take any more of your time. I love talking to you about this. When speaking to new labels and young labels and soon to be labels, what advice do you have for new labels or soon to be labels? Is there any bad advice you hear going on right now that you think people should ignore?
Oh wow, that is a great question. I would say number one, be fair to your artists. So be transparent about your process. Be upfront about how royalties are going to be split.
That's
I
great.
would say to places like Bandcamp are absolutely your friend. If you're going to do physical, hook up with a distributor.
Okay.
And ask around and make sure that they're a reliable one, because they're the people who are going to be able to get your music into stores and so forth.
Right.
There's going to be a certain amount of infrastructure that you will have to farm out depending on how ambitious you are, and that's definitely one of them. You could hire an independent publicist, unless you want to try and do it on your own. I guess those are the essentials. In terms of bad advice, there's stuff that you don't need to pay for. That's for sure. So,
like what?
Or just make sure you're getting getting your money's worth. And then, focus on radio, college radio.
Oh, really? Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's. All three of us at the label actually started in college radio, and I think that was pretty invaluable in terms of just getting your first glimmers of insights into the industry and how it works. But I remember being a college DJ, I was always down to play weird stuff, and
right.
You want to be the one who's like discovering a smaller band or embracing a local band, even if they're not signed or if they're on like a young nascent label. So I would definitely I would say that college radio, or I guess non-commercial, is a great place to focus your energy in terms of promotion. Yeah.
No, that's a good point. And actually that's the first time I've heard that, but I've always wondered that. We have in my town here, we have a great university radio station that's hugely, hugely supportive of our label and of all the local artists. And it's something I think that if you come from a certain generation, you kind of putting radio out of the back of your mind, and you've kind of thought, well, that's over and soon that'll close down. But I have a real heart for it, and I think it's really cool. And it's interesting what role it's going to play in music discovery, and it is still an analog thing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Listen, thanks so much, Jason. I really appreciate this. I'm a huge fan of Hardly Art. I kind of came through you guys through Gem Club and their records. I love that band. Thank you so much for doing this. I really, really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. I hope that wasn't too much word salad answers.
No, it's great. Word salad's good. That's good. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure.
And thanks, everyone, for listening. Check out Hardly Art at hardlyart.com. They're on Twitter at Hardly Art and on Instagram at Hardly Art Records. They're home to Chastity Belt, Colleen Green, Dude York, a ton of great bands that you've probably already heard of. In fact, you've probably already heard of Hardly Art. Who am I kidding? So make sure you check them out. Head to a record store and buy a record. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe, leave a review, send me an email. Listen, if you're an indie label or involved in the industry in any way and you want to get involved in this podcast, please do email me, podcasts@otherrecordlabels.com, or find me on Twitter at othersongsmusic. Just get in touch. That'd be great. Thanks for listening.